Thank you. It's indeed an honor and privilege to be here speaking at this forum with this community. In fact, since I came, I heard the talk by on Moon.school, Mon.school, and of Rudra Saraswat. And I was like totally amazed at the kind of energy and the kind of enterprise that is there. So considering what we have heard from the young developers and from the community, what I will be going to talk about challenges and opportunities with FOSS in government. As government, we all know, is something which is very dull, very boring, and very often something that we always want to change, and we always wonder, why is the government the way it is, and what can we do to make it better, what we can do to make it as good as as our own projects. So I look forward to, I'll be sharing some insights, but I would be looking forward to your suggestions, your inputs, in what ways we in the government, our developer community, I am not a techie, but I have a team of developers who helps us with the various projects that we are implementing in the government, how we can collaborate, how we can join hands, how we can work together in order to ensure that the GovTech, the apps and the solutions that we are building in the government are as good or as efficient or as optimized as the ones that you are building. Yeah. So first and foremost, what I would like to begin with is that there are several misconceptions when it comes to FOSS in the government. Very often we feel that government doesn't use FOSS. It's not widely used in the government programs. Then there is another misconception. This is there in the community. Very often people feel that government doesn't use FOSS. Then within the government, there are people who feel, very senior people, who feel that FOSS isn't as good as the commercial software. And very often, in fact, some people start thinking FOSS as something which is community-led, and if you implement a project with FOSS, you don't know who is responsible. And in government, very often, there is always a fear of something going wrong. And if something goes wrong, you should be able to pinpoint to someone. So because of that, comes in some resistance in the way, the culture that is there in the government. Therein, in fact, the people who are building FOSS solutions in the government, they first try to impress upon that it's not that FOSS means an unknown world. It's not a black box. There are people, there are companies, there are support institutions who provide support for developing anything in FOSS. Then there are some people who think that within the government, since accountability has to build up, our information assurance policies, like what all can be shared, what all can be not shared, will prohibit FOSS. Again, that's again a misconception that we are trying to dispel. Then security issues, people feel that it's not as secure as proprietary software. That's again something we are trying to address, but I am sure with events like this, with looking at other FOSS solutions and looking at the FOSS solutions which are existing within the government, this can be easily dispelled. Then again, people feel that when I open up my code on GitHub or on OpenForge, anybody can come and insert any malicious code into that. Again, that's something which is not true. We all know. I don't need to speak on that in this community. Now, first and foremost, which are the projects which are there in the government which are running on FOSS? I'm sure many of you would have heard of some of these projects. Adhaar is well known, UPI is well known, CoWIN is well known, Arogya Setu is well known, Diksha is the open source learning platform which has got crores of users, and especially in the pandemic, we had almost the entire online education in government schools countrywide running on the Diksha platform. Then DigiLocker, I'm sure some of you would be knowing, Poshan Tracker, the ICDS, 12 lakh Anganwadi workers use it every day to feed in data with regard to the nutrition that they are giving to more than 1 crore pregnant women and newborn children. That also is running on open source platforms. Then API Setu, I don't know how many of you are aware, but apisetu.gov.in. So those of you who are building open source solutions and who want to use APIs for doing various kinds of things, authenticating government services, using them for building your own code, the apisetu.gov.in provides APIs for more than 1,000 services. GEM, the government e-marketplace, Umang, e-office, e-hospital. So these are just a few examples which are running on open source tools. So this notion that government is not using open source is not correct. Then when we look at, say, for example, Adhaar, I will not go into detail. Adhaar we all know, like billion plus people, millions of authentications every day, the deduplication, the kind of architecture Aadhaar has, I don't think any other system anywhere in the world is built at that scale and and it's working well for the last almost 12 years now. And and every day so many authentications, whether it's for rations or whether it's for e-payments or whether it's for other transactions happening through Aadhaar. The code that is there, it's on Linux, RabbitMQ, now it's on Kafka, then Redis, and then Postgres SQL. All these things are being used on the Aadhaar project. Similarly, GST is again the system that was built in, is one of the world's largest taxation systems that is there. And it's like the number of, if we look at the number of concurrent users or the number of load that we have in the system or the number of invoices, the kind of redundancy that is there, all of it is possible. So anyone who thinks that open source solutions cannot work as well as proprietary software, the fact that these are working makes it clear that it does. Even the vaccination platform, the certificates that we all have. In fact, countries like the US and all, they issue paper certificates for the COVID-19 vaccination. In India, like for more than 200 crore doses, 2 billion doses we have administered, and all of them, or everyone gets a certificate instantly. And more so, like on one day, like 17 September, we peaked with the number of doses, almost 25 million doses. And that day we have more than 1,000 API hits on the AWS servers. And that was also handled. So any scalable platform can run on FOSS. That thinking that it cannot be done is not correct. But the challenge within the government is that, the challenges that we have are what? We consume a lot of FOSS. We are using a lot of FOSS artifacts for solutions, for building our solutions. But are we contributing to FOSS? Are we contributing our code back to the community? Are we ensuring that we are expanding the overall the repositories that exist? There is more to be done. Very often people are shy. They do take open source solutions, but they do not contribute to. So we are working on that, and that I mentioned, the cultural issues are a huge barrier. Sometimes some of our teams, they think that if they have written a code and if there is somebody who comes, a Rudra comes, a 12-year-old, and he suggests a better way to write that code, they take it as a reflection on their own competency. Which is wrong, which one should do. So we need to change that attitude, we need to change that mindset in order to ensure that the developer community, when it engages with you, when they suggest something, when they comment something, when they give some input, that is for the overall larger public good. But that cultural shift is happening, should happen faster, and maybe we need to work together, think of working out mechanisms in what ways we can build trust between the developers within the government and the community. Like, how do you ensure that there are people who are there to contribute and there are not people just out there to put you down or try to steal your code or try to put malicious any bug in your code? That's not, so that thing we need to bridge, and we need to find out mechanisms in which we need to do that. Then capacity building within the government, we need to build up a lot of capacities when it comes to open source. People are very comfortable with proprietary software sometimes, but if we train people, if we equip them, then I'm sure we will be able to handle that. Then another challenge that we have is from vendors and system integrators, because government procurement happens through RFPs and tenders, and sometimes it follows the QCBS model, but sometimes if the most responsive bidder or the L1 bidder is quoting a proprietary software, then there is hardly any choice but to use what has come through the procurement systems. So we need to think of writing RFPs which allows smaller players to be able to bid projects so that they will be able to give more competitive prices. Why FOSS? This is well known. I won't spend time on that. Low cost, better solutions, more agile, interoperable, high scalability, security. All these features are there with FOSS solutions. Now, what has been the policy push, like MEITY? Like there are a lot of efforts which have been done for ensuring that open source policy, collaborative tools are built up within the government. So MEITY had come out with the open source software policy, and it kind of laid down that open source will be the preferred mode of implementation of software products within the government. This was way back in 2015, and there were certain objectives which are given, how it reduces the total cost of ownership, how it ensures strategic control, and why it should be done. So this policy is already laid down. It's available on the MEITY's website. the open source policy, then we also came up with the policy on collaborative application development by opening the source code of government applications. This policy is also notified, it's there on the MEITY's website, and it was also laid down the objective that this should be done, this is ideally required to be done. So open source policy is there is no bar when it comes to policy level enablement for going ahead on this route. Then Open API policy. MEITY has also come up with the Open API policy, which ensures that all APIs that are there are published on the api-setu.gov.in. And what it does is that once you publish your APIs, then building solutions, interoperable solutions using something which is already there, a service which is already there, becomes easier to implement in that. For example, the COVID project, we opened up the COVID vaccination APIs, which could be integrated by any other service provider, whether it's a MyGate or whether it's any other, a Zomato or a Swiggy or a Amazon. They could integrate that so that the delivery boys, you could check the vaccination certificates. Similarly, the DigiLocker APIs are available, which allows other product developers to integrate with DigiLocker APIs. The Arogya Setu APIs were published. Similarly, the Poshan Tracker APIs we are giving to state government so that if they want to formulate their nutrition plans, they could do that. The Open API policy is also a step in that direction in order to build more open interoperable solutions which can provide services across government domains. And of course, it will lead to innovation, and a lot of data will be available. One could use non-personal anonymized data. And if we are talking of the AI revolution and all, then only way it can happen is if we are able to open up the data which the government is holding with the privacy protection norms and ensure that anybody using that data at aggregate level can build solutions. For example, if there is data with regard to, say, for example, speed breakers, location of speed breakers in a city, then somebody who is designing a 10-minute delivery can use that data to plan his operations much better. OpenForge.gov.in, I don't know how many of you are aware, this is our GitHub. Government has set up a collaborative platform. So most of our code of our open source projects are published on this, and our developers engage here. We do collaborative code development, and we publish on GitHub also, but OpenForge is our repository on which all our code is published. And this is done with the objective of not only getting into collaborative code development, but also for reuse within the government. Okay, like if Gujarat has done something, or Tamil Nadu or Karnataka has done something, and a Bihar or UP wants to use the same code, then they should be able to use it by picking it up from the OpenForge repository. And this has been like our mainstay for the last 6-7 years, but still we need to kind of, from the feedback that I was getting during TE and others, we need to engage more with the community. And if maybe if we have a OpenFOSS or with the event with FOSS United, in which we bring together the government open source developers along with this community, and then try to build up linkages and try to build up better contacts for going ahead on this. Opportunities, reuse of code. I mentioned like how code can be shared, how can it be reused within the government from one state to the other, and now even other countries are looking into our code. Like the IndiaStack.global was launched a few days back by our Honorable Prime Minister on 4th of July. And IndiaStack.global, what it does is that 12 major projects are put up on that portal, and including the GitHub and the OpenForge links and the documentation of those projects, so that if any country wants to adopt, say, UPI, or wants to adopt DigiLocker, or wants to adopt Diksha, they could learn from there, they could pick it up from there and do that. If we are doing it, if we are opening it for other countries, why not within India also, and why not to our community? Then open source does reduce total cost of ownership. It ensures collaborative development, it ensures innovation. Then it helps in developing an ecosystem of innovative solutions across e-gov projects. COVID and DigiLocker are some examples for that. So roadmap, what is the roadmap? How we plan to go ahead further in this direction? There is a policy push. The policies have already been notified. There are groups which are working, which are ensuring that how do we ensure that we increase the use of FOSS in the government. Then how do we support the FOSS ecosystem? A few days back, in fact, a few months back, we had launched an innovation challenge for building solutions on open source. Like how do we source that? How do we do procurement of open source solution? Can we do it through hackathons? Can we do it through innovation challenges? Can we ensure that they are listed on GEM? Can we ensure that when we are doing tendering, we make it some special, when we are doing the technical evaluation, can we give preference to open source solution by allocating separate marks for that? Can we give preference to small and medium sized FOSS enterprises so that they are able to compete with the bigger big tech companies who bid for government projects, so that they are able to also join the effort to build solutions within the government. Then policies, notifying policies is very easy, whether it's for OpenForge, the collaborative development, or open source, or for open APIs. But how do we monitor that? Do we have an institutional framework which can actually monitor and evaluate whether we are adhering to that? Just making a statement of intent that yes, we have open source policy and we'll do that doesn't help. But to actually see that any department or any institution or any organization which is implementing a e-gov project or a digital governance project actually adheres to that. So that institutional mechanism is required. It can be done. There have been several discussions, in fact, that we could do it with the open source program office, or we can do a center for excellence in FOSS, which can help us doing that. Then how do we build capacities for FOSS? How do we train people? How do we kind of give them skills? How do we connect them to the community? How do we kind of make them part of forums like this, in which they share what they are doing, they share the challenges that they have, learn from the community, and do that. So that's also something which is very, very important point in our strategy as we go ahead. Then as we work out the strategy for Digital India 2.0 and going from silos based to a whole of government approach, wherein we like integrate all our projects, because citizen doesn't care which department is offering the project. Citizen cares the government is offering. So how do we connect health with women and child, with education, so that across the life cycle of a citizen, all these various projects are interlinked. So how do we make it in that strategy for FOSS a part of the Digital India 2.0 strategy? Then India Stack, as we all know, India Stack comprises of our key projects. Most of them, which I showed in the first slide, are on open source. How do we kind of offer it to the world for adoption by making them open source? That's also one of the key points. And as we go ahead this year, as we get G20 presidency, one of the missions which we have got from the Honorable Prime Minister's office directly is that we need to make India Stack open source. We need to make it available for adoption by the global community. So I would conclude with this, and if there are any questions, I would be happy to take them.
Sorry, bro. You'll get the next chance. Thanks, Abhishek, for explaining this. Very interesting to see government taking keen initiatives on this. I've been a keen follower of FOSS, especially with respect to government, since the late 2000s. I'll introduce myself. I'm Ranjit for the records. My question to you is that maybe this question stems out of my unawareness about the space. We have centers of excellence like ICFOSS in Kerala, which basically brings together all the students, the young folks out there for a lot of joint ventures, initiatives and all. What is a similar thing happening at a national level? Which, if it is happening, what is it? If not, when can we expect that? Especially in places like Bangalore, which is the IT hub, I believe that there are a lot of enthusiasts out here, and government can take advantage of the enthusiasm from those folks. So I would like to know from you, what is the parallel to that Government of India has?
See, like within the Government of India, like NIC has a FOSS, I think they call it a Center for Excellence, but their linkages with other similar initiatives, say for example, you mentioned Kerala, similar initiatives are there in Bangalore. CDAC also has a group which is working on free and open source software. But what we need to do, as I mentioned, is that we need to bring together all these separate siloed initiatives within the states, within organizations, within CDAC, within NIC, within MEITY, onto a common kind of framework, and maybe set up an institutional mechanism which can collate what all is being done all over. And so far in government, what we have seen is that a lot of open source work has been champion-led. But in order to institutionalize that, we need to collect that individual initiatives and brought it on a forum, and also have the institutional mechanism of actually doing audits and monitoring the implementation of the policies which have been notified.
So basically I was really interested in the idea of ONDC, right? And I wanted to explore more, I wanted to follow more. In fact, I wanted to integrate with our business as well. The problem that I faced was that the documentation was not up to the mark. I had to go in every single code page and check out what is the other specs. But after that as well, I was not able to clearly identify on how do I integrate it with the system itself. Right? Are there any standards that are set by the government to make sure that before you start a project, these XYZ things needs to be fulfilled? And if not, then probably we can have a discussion later because we need to have certain standards, like for example, documentation in place, specs in place on how what are the things that needs to go in an open source project, so that the consumers can consume it well. So I was just having a talk with my friend that if you don't have consumers, or if you don't make it easier for the consumers to consume the product or the open source software, the project might not accelerate the way you want it to be, right? So,
Fully agree with what you just said. And the OpenForge portal and OpenForge policy lays down those standards and lays down the steps that are required for publishing a project or publishing an application on the OpenForge portal. But sometimes, as I mentioned, there is a definite lack of capacity because of which some projects might not be adhering to what is required. And we do need to set up a monitoring and evaluation mechanism in order to ensure that those projects which claim to be open source and are published on GitHub or OpenForge are actually in not only letter but in also spirit and in actual action fully compliant with the regulations that are required. With regard to your feedback on ONDC, I will definitely share it with Mr. Koshi, who is building it, and there also the approach is to build a fully compliant open source, open standards based interoperable network which allows everyone to onboard seamlessly. But if you have faced that challenge, I will definitely share it with that team and try to ask them to fix this. Well, I will share this also. Yeah.
Yeah, so you mentioned a bunch of open source policies, and as far as I could understand, the scope of those policies was mainly focusing on code. Are there efforts being made to make data, open data accessible as well, or do they come under the scope of these policies as well? And if yes, what sort of data are you talking about? Because off the top of my head, when I think data regarding the government should be open, at the base level, it's with regards to my municipality or my district and things like that, where my taxpayer funds are going and stuff like that. And I think that would also greatly reduce the friction between, an average Joe going and getting information about what developments are happening in and around this place.
Again, very relevant question. In fact, there is for data sharing and access policy, the National Data Sharing and Access Policy was laid down in 2012, and that led to the setting of the data.gov.in portal. So data.gov.in is India's open data portal. It has got more than 500,000 data sets. But we had in January, we had done an audit of the high-value data sets there, and what we found was that a lot needs to be improved there. Because there are data sets, but some of the data sets are sometimes not complete, are not indexed. So all those feedback came in consultations that we did with industry. After that, in February, we had come up with the India Data Sharing and Access Policy, which was published. Then there was some feedback that we received. Then based on that, that policy was revised. And then the National Data Governance Framework and Policy, that was published in April. Then we again did public consultations in May or June. I think there was a public consultation held in Delhi. Again, a lot of feedback came in. And by and large, the intent of the policy is to ensure that all non-personal data, which non-personal data with the anonymization and privacy preservation tools should be made available in the public domain and should be made available for researchers and academics and entrepreneurs who want to build solutions on top of that. So the feedback, lot of feedback, there's a separate division in MEITY which is looking into that. So they are collating all the feedback that has been received and trying to publish the revised data governance and framework policy. And based on that, simultaneously, a work is already on to build the India Data Open Data Portal 2.0, which will address many of these issues. In fact, there is a Civic Data Labs, there's a company called Civic Data Labs which is helping NIC build that. So once that is there, it will ensure that data sharing becomes seamless, because if we are not able to make data available on the open data portal, then we will be limiting a lot of innovations. So presently what we also face a challenge is that not only with startups and with entrepreneurs and with coders sharing of data, within the government also sharing of data sometimes becomes a problem. Like a rural development department which has got data with regard to, say, for example, Manrega beneficiaries, the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. And Health Ministry is running Ayushman Bharat program in which they are issuing health insurance to poor people. So the clientele, the customer base of both these schemes are almost the same. But each one of them have to do the beneficiary identification on their own. So what we are trying to ensure is that within the government, within various government departments, data sharing for the purposes of delivery of schemes with a consent-based architecture should be seamless. And at the same time, the non-personal data should be made available for any research purposes or any innovation purposes.
That was a very candid presentation. Thank you for that. I have one specific question about procurement. You briefly mentioned procurement. So what do you think is how feasible is a strict change to the procurement policy in India? Let's say a tweak that maybe mandates FOSS or heavily prefers FOSS where an alternative is not available. How feasible would that be really in reality? Thank you.
See, mandating would always result in a challenge, because the moment you mandate, the firms which are selling proprietary, they get up in arms, and ultimately the norm that the Chief Vigilance Commission and all they prescribe is that whenever we are doing any procurement, we should define the end objectives and then go in for a QCBS kind of model in which we do the technical evaluation of the solutions which is being offered, and then have a financial quote, and a combination of that should decide who is there. So if for any reason, for any particular service, if a vendor which is offering a proprietary software quotes lower than for a vendor which is offering open source solution, then you are left with no choice. But yes, we should ensure that the procurement norms, the technical evaluation criteria are more equitable, and in no ways puts in any barriers for companies which are offering FOSS or open source solutions from participating in the procurement processes. So that we ensure that a level playing field, and in some projects wherein the intent is to promote open source, therein some marks, like if you are giving 100 marks for the technical evaluation, 5 or 10 marks is given for FOSS in order to give them some preference. And after that, only the procurements happen.
Hi, thank you for the talk. In your talk you mentioned IndiaStack.global. I just checked it, but a lot of those projects don't have the code, but you kind of answered it that you are taking steps to push people to bring the code and proper documentation to it. So my question is, my feeling is that most projects, if they start open source, that it's much easier. So my question is, what goes into starting a project? Like, let's say the COVID was probably started very recently when COVID hit. But so when starting that project internally, like what goes into it? Like what does it take to start it as an open source project and continue that way?
See, like any project that is implemented, like the thought is given and then people start architecting it, designing it, and if there are some projects which are done by writing an RFP, getting an MSP who will implement the project. There are some projects which are done by our in-house teams. So sometimes, like for example, the CoWIN project, the vaccination portal, was launched with a lead time of say 15 days or 3 weeks. In fact, the health ministry was working on it, and then the whole thing was all over the place, and suddenly 16th Jan the vaccination was to be launched, and then in the reviews it was felt that this is the largest such vaccination that anyone that India has ever done, and here the complexities was too much, like two different kinds of vaccines at that point of time, 2 doses, different intervals in various doses, then managing the logistics, managing the cold chain, ensuring that the vaccines are reaching everywhere, ensuring that people remember, ensuring that, because most people also forget, like when did you take the first vaccine, which one vaccine did you take? So keeping a whole track of it was quite challenging. So this project was done in-house with volunteers, with developers who got together, who worked out the design architecture and picked up, like DIVOX was proposed by e-gov Foundation here, which was used for the open source solution for certification. So different projects follow different norms. So depending on the urgency, depending on the time available, depending on the overall objectives, it is done. Governments are tend to become more of status quoists and not do anything that can result in any kind of risk. The fear of anything going wrong sometimes and lack of ability and competence, that capability, that is also there. So combination of factors which lets things the way they are, but yes, things are changing. There are a lot of projects which have been done in, and there are a lot of developers within the government who are very upbeat about that. Maybe we need to have more such conversations with communities like this and build bridges in order to have more trust and faith in their abilities and the abilities of the community. I think we are off time. So thank you. It was indeed a pleasure interacting with this, and hope we continue these conversations. And very soon, maybe I will coordinate with Venki and the team and see if we can jointly host such an event in which we bring together the actual developers and coders with this community and share ideas and thoughts. Thank you.